Many years ago, thousands of years ago, people in the northern hemisphere were thought to have gathered wreaths of evergreen and lit fires as signs of hope in the coming spring and renewed light. The custom was kept alive by Christians, and by the 16th century, the Advent wreath had gradually spread across many parts of the world. Today, Advent is the period of 4 Sundays leading up to Christmas. It's also the time when days are shortest, when cold settles in and when people need the cheer brought by the promise of light and warmth. As we light one more candle each Sunday, this Advent wreath that you can see here behind the Okamoto family is a symbol of our waiting experience. Week by week, the candles remind us that the darkness of fear and hopelessness recedes as more and more light is shed into the world. The flame of each new candle reminds us that more is yet to come. On this first Sunday in Advent, we light this candle of hope with the words of Macrina Werdeker, a Benedictine monastic, and now is going to share our reading.
I was just thinking one morning during prayer how much alike hope and baking powder are. Quietly getting what is best in me to rise, awakening the hint of eternity within.
So as one of you lights the candle, yeah, there you go. We have these words, from our chalice flame. May this candle awaken the best in us, connect us to the eternal, and give life to our hope. Thank you. The curse of the mask, you can't blow it out. Thank you so much. They're a great team. And our opening words this morning are by Jan Richardson, A Blessing for Traveling in the Dark, Go slow if you can. Slower, more slowly still. Friendly, dark, or fearsome, this is no place to break your neck by rushing, by running, by crashing into what you cannot see. Then again, it is true, different darks have different tasks, and if you have arrived here unawares, if you have come in peril or in pain, this might be no place you should dawdle. I do not know what these shadows ask of you, what they might hold that means you good or ill. It is not for me to reckon whether you should linger or you should leave. But this is what I can ask for you, that in the darkness there be a blessing, that in the shadows there be a welcome, that in the night you be encompassed by the love that knows your name. Our opening hymn this morning is one of my favorite Advent hymns. It's German, and it's from the 15th century, so we haven't messed with the words, and it is not in our hymnal, so we have printed up copies. If you need a copy, I think they are still in the windows, and you could also raise your hand and an usher will help you out. And on a personal side note, this is a hymn that I was singing when I knew what name I would give my son. And his name is Jesse, and it just foretells a lineage. I just like the sound of it. And I invite you to rise in body or spirit and join me in singing, Lo, how a rose bloomen. And please remain standing for our unison affirmation printed in our order of service. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. El amor es el espíritu de esta iglesia, y el servicio es su ley. Esta es nuestro gran pacto, vivir juntos en paz, buscar la verdad en el amor y ayudarnos los unos a los otros. And you may be seated. It sounds so good in Spanish. I am behind the times. I have to read it so close, but you all have it in your heart. It's so beautiful. So let's see. Good morning. Welcome to the first parish in Bedford gathered in love and service for justice and peace. We got through Thanksgiving. Yay! I heard a little joke about that. There was a little boy named Johnny and his family, and they were having guests over to dinner. When the dinner was nearly over, little Johnny went to the kitchen and proudly carried in the first piece of apple pie, giving it to his father, who passed it to a guest. Little Johnny came in with a second piece of pie and gave it to his father, who again gave it to a guest. Well, this was too much for little Johnny, who said, "It's no use, Dad. The pieces are all the same size." So we are between seasons here. It is actually the first day of Advent, and yet we are still sort of digesting our pie. But I see new figurines that you will hear more about next week, but have a look up there by the clock, and they, you will hear, no, I won't tell. You will hear more about them next week, but they are making their way towards the front, and they will be up here during our nativity scene on Christmas Eve. Welcome to everyone who is here this morning online, and we know some of you are going to be able to see little faces up there. Sometimes we picture everybody. And welcome to everyone who is here in this room. It's so great to be all together. Welcome to a church home where we lift up and appreciate the many diversities among us. We are a community where all can teach and all can learn, where we strive to take care of one another, examine where we fall short in our lives, gain hope and courage, and leave here ready to do our part in creating a more just society. Whoever you are, whatever is working or not working in your life, we are really glad you have come. We are especially delighted to see you if this is your first time with us, and we would like to know more about you. You will find a welcome card in your pew. You might fill it out and put it in the offering basket during the offertory. Following the service, we hope you'll join us for fellowship and coffee and maybe some treats in the common room. Okay, let's see. Coming up next Saturday, you may have a pamphlet that tells a little more than I know about the wonderful artisan fair that will be up here, all set up in the bacon room, spread out, and it's going to be great. People from all over town are bringing their beautiful handcrafted goods. We hope you'll figure out how to keep it local, support local artists and the church, and come here, shop early and often. Also coming up next Saturday, December 3rd, we have an important online workshop for our congregation. And it's called Beyond Categorical Thinking. It's offered as part of our search process in search of a new, settled senior minister. All of us have hidden biases or overt opinions about who we'd like as our next settled minister. Age, race, gender, theology, etc. We all have them. It's really okay that we have them. We lived our life and we ended up where we are at. But it's also fabulous to overturn the stone and see what's there. One of the best ministers I know is extremely large and uses a wheelchair. She said, "You wouldn't believe how many congregations couldn't quite get past their own biases. They didn't really want to name it, but they didn't engage with any more conversations and move forward with her, although they loved her preaching and her pastoral presence." Another friend is a trans man. His congregation is thriving, in part because the congregation was truly ready to be led by someone who doesn't fit the norm. What is normal, anyway? We want to be ready to welcome an excellent minister, period. And this workshop is offered by the UUA to every congregation in search to help us prepare the way. It's led well and it's enlightening. I personally hope to be there and to be there with all of you who can come. Our search committee has been sending emails about it, so keep your eye out for that link. So I mentioned the Holiday Artisans Fair. Also during that time, Girl Scouts are hosting a table. It's a chance for young people in our community to come and shop at a table free of money. Just, you know how young people don't have money, it's just the way our world is messed up. So there's no way for them to shop for you. So this is a chance for young people to come to the table, look around, and pick a gift, and then wrap it. It's really exciting. They need the gifts, though. So we're hoping that if you have something that you just know is going to be nice for a young person to give someone in their family, you'd consider donating it so that a young person can share in the giving aspect of Christmas and holidays. So you could drop off any little items in the entranceway over here. We also have the senior youth group who is collecting socks and hand warmers, not gloves, hand warmers, those little square things that you break and then they're warm. You know what I mean, right? I believe that Joanne Glover is also collecting holiday cards that are blank, not any old random one, but holiday cards. And this goes to prisoners who then can send them to folks that they want to send it to, and that is collected in a box also in our entranceway. All right, and now let us deepen into a time of contemplation as we share in the joys and concerns among us this morning.
Great. I'm Lori Groves. I'm a member of the Lay Pastoral Care Team, and this is the time in our service when we invite you to stand up over here in line to light a candle of joy or concern that you are experiencing right now.
This morning's theme is all about waiting, how if you wait and hope, sometimes a very good thing will come to you. And this metaphor is at the heart of the Christmas story, but it can be applied to all sorts of things in our lives. And so just to prove it, I want to tell you that you who are here in church or with us online are the winners. We are about to experience something so rare that I would guess it probably just hasn't happened before. And in all my own years here since 2009, I have heard Steve SUSSMAN play the piano with the most gorgeous melodies bursting forth week after week with magic fingers, or choosing a postlude that just perfectly matches the theme or the sermon of the day. Isn't that right? Your eyebrows just shoot up. And yet, I have never heard him stand up here and talk. And I have been waiting and hoping, what does this brilliant man think about? And so I figured we hadn't asked him. And I asked him, and he said, oh, well, sure, I'll answer a few questions. Yes, so the waiting is over. Come on up, Steve. Grab maybe that. Well, why don't you just stand next to me? Well, here, this fine. Yeah, we'll share this one. Great.
I usually don't talk before 12, but...
Our waiting has paid off. All right, so I could ask questions, or we could field a few, and then you could pick the one you want to answer. Do you have any? Is that too scary?
That's fine.
Oh, he's open. Okay, he says he's open to it. So if you have a question you've just been waiting to hear, we promise not to embarrass you, but is there a question that's bubbling up in the room? And I'll ask if there's a young person first, because I love that they're with us today through the whole service. Just raise your hand if you have anything you'd like to ask Steve, probably about being a musician or a pianist or the guy that he is behind the piano. And I do see Rebecca. Let's see if there's anyone. Okay, Rebecca.
How often and how long do you play the piano?
That depends on what's coming up in my life in terms of what I have to prepare. In the last 2 months, it's been very busy, so I play the piano quite often, maybe 3-4 hours a day, aside from the actual job, per se. So through my life in college, I used to practice 6 hours a day, maybe. And then it got a little less when I had children. And I was working, so it varies in terms of what the demand is for what I have to do.
All right. Oh, I'm going to just go with Bob first, and then Doug, and then the gentleman in the back, who I have to learn your name.
So, as the guy who used to sign the checks, I know.
You know what I'm realizing? I'm going to bring you a mic, because people on Zoom need to hear your question. So let me do that. And folks with hearing-assisted devices, too, would like to hear the question.
So, as the guy who used to sign the checks, I know how much or how little we pay you. How do you put 5 kids through college?
I work often. Teaching is my staple, so a lot of sonatinas have put me help, and you have to go to the right schools that give you the aid as well.
And Doug, I think. I'm just going to walk around.
You are a highlight. Sometimes I come just to listen to you. Honestly, it's definitely an inspiration. But the question is, when did you discover the piano? How young were you when you started?
I started in 3rd grade, which by some standards is probably 3 years too late. And it was just something I always enjoyed and was fairly good at. And I decided to go to college and for piano. I guess I'll backtrack. My first serious teacher was in high school. And she was very motivational, and I just thought she was wonderful. And it just continued, and then to the point where I think I didn't know if I could do anything else. I don't know. And just kept at it. And it's tricky life, but it's worked out. Yes?
And over here, Paul Pellegrini.
Yeah, okay. One of the questions has already been answered. Yeah, you started in 3rd grade, so you're about 8 or 9 years old. But the question I have really is, do you play anything more esoteric or modern or things like that? Are you basically a classical musician?
I play all styles, pop, jazz, musical theater. I enjoy playing all different styles. I do play modern classical music as well. That's quite a challenge, and haven't been doing it as much. So yes, I do. In high school, I was in rock bands and jazz bands all through that part of my life. I do have jazz trios and jazz duos now. When the pandemic subsides even more, then that'll open up even more. It's not so much work there right now.
All right, I'm going to take these two, but last chance, any young person want to ask something? Just want to make room. All right, I'm going to, Bob, and then Rich. Oh, you know what? Hold the presses. We have a young person over here.
I was wondering if you wrote any of your own music?
I have. I've written some pieces for my students for a contemporary music seminar we have at the school I teach at. And I've also collaborated with a lyricist, mainly his project. I just kind of fixed the lousy chords he put to it. And, so I have. That's a lot of work, writing your own music. It takes a lot of time.
Steve, we love hearing you play in church, but are there other places we can go to hear you?
Well, again, with the pandemic, things have changed. So I have several groups that go around. We mostly do senior centers. We've been at Carlton Willard several times, and so I play often at places like that, which have beautiful venues, most of these places with beautiful pianos. There are other churches I play at as well, concerts, and I'm playing with two choruses. I'm not sure where their concert's at, so I don't know how much is open to the public at this time in featuring me. You know, I'm not really one to have to be the feature. I don't need the glory of it. I just enjoy playing and having a captive audience, you know.
Hi, Steve. Steve, I think I've told Steve that there's 3 things I'd like to do if I get to come back, and one of them is to play the piano like you do. I think I've told you that. But I'm wondering, how many pieces can you play without music? An estimate of the number. I've seen you do it up there a lot, but I marvel at it.
Well, Rich, I fake a lot of them, but you know, I'll just say they asked Earl Garner how many songs he knew, and he looked at the interviewer and he said, "How many stars are there in the universe?" I'm certainly not him. I couldn't imagine, but I do fake a lot, you know, and if you act like you know what you're doing, people are convinced, you know, so.
All right, and I think Olivia's going to close us out with the last question here.
Do you have a favorite song to play on the piano?
That's an excellent question. It actually changes for me. You know, I get very much involved in a song, and it stays there until I discover another one. So right now, I'd say my favorite song is a song called "I Wish You Love."
Wow.
Did you want to ask a question?
Well, you are the reason I come to church so often, Steve. Oh my gosh. It's a joy to know you personally and to work with you and to hear you. It's just, we are so, so lucky and so grateful. And my question is, I guess, how do you do that? So I think it's rhetorical. He's going to answer. It's okay.
It's rhetorical, but patience. Patience. It's all about patience as you're working on your craft. I like the process. I like figuring out the problems and then being able to share it with people. So that's how.
Well, thank you. Let's give it up for Steve.
Good morning. I'm Randy Courier, and I really want to hear "I Wish You Love." Hope that will come up. Our reading this morning is titled "The Grace Within a Pecan Pie" by Jake Morrill. And he begins with this quote by Thomas Merton from A Prayer of Unknowing. "My Lord God, I have no idea where I am going. I do not see the road ahead of me. I cannot know for certain where it will end. Nor do I really know myself. And the fact that I think I'm following your will does not mean I'm actually doing so." And Jake Morrill writes, "Patience isn't my strength. I want to tear out every window in the Advent calendar and gobble up all the chocolate. I want to know how my children's lives will turn out. I want justice to arrive irrevocably in the structures and hearts of this world. But Advent slows me down. Wisdom whispers, just wait. And sometimes wisdom speaks as a lava-hot pecan pie. Other pies have their virtues, but none transfixes the soul like the winsome pecan. Waiting for it to bake is out-and-out agony. Mid-bake, you know you'll be tempted to nibble a sample, but resist, it'll burn your tongue off. Don't ask how I know. Even right out of the oven, it's not ready. According to personal research, the pie enthusiast who leaps in at that moment will also observe dramatically unwanted tongue-specific sensations. No, a pie like pecan is going to need time to set. Not to sit, but to set. It's a word bakers know. When a pecan pie sets, the gooey mess on the inside starts to get organized, not through external intervention, but through a strange and subtle emergent upwelling. There have been times in my life when everything on the inside was a gooey mess. That's been the case more days than not throughout the pandemic. Trying harder turned out not to be the solution, and neither did pretending I knew what to do. So on my better days, I'm trying to cut loose the hustle, hunker down into stillness, and to let myself set. S-E-T. Surrender everything tenderly. Tenderly, I surrender my pride and my shame, my need for approval, my need for control or to know what comes next, even my certainty about pie and all those other opinions that clutter my brain. For me, surrendering everything tenderly brings an awareness of that strange and subtle emergent upwelling, which I've come to know as the action of grace. It's a clarity and coherence that I can't get from striving. Advent is a time of not yet and already, when we impatiently await what is already here. Maybe this Advent season, with what you have wanted still so far away, one option could be to give up trying, which doesn't mean to just wait. With pecan pie in mind and any trust you can muster in the action of grace, why not set a while?
Freely we have received, freely may we give. Our morning's offering will now be gratefully received. There is a little person in a tutu in the middle aisle, and I love that. We love young people in church, and we have little busy boxes. If that's useful to anyone of any age, they can be found in the vestibule, the narthex, and sometimes the windows. We are really glad for everyone among us. All right. The red sun-packed earth spread out for miles and miles beneath the wheels of the government-issued trailers. FEMA had opened up a makeshift mess hall, and haggard men and women and children stood in long lines to pick up their meals in styrofoam containers. A few wandering children drew pictures with their fingers in the dust. I stood in the shade of a large tent watching Red Cross workers sort supplies. Hurricane Katrina had come and gone 2 weeks before, and what remained in its wake was chaos and disillusionment. House upon house, rimmed with shoulder-high water lines from the flood, stood empty and abandoned, the contents having been washed away through the doors and windows. Ridiculously, cars were upturned or even wedged high into the trees. Street corners held piles of debris as high as buildings where cleanup crews had dumped furniture and fences, parts of houses, tarmac, and every other object imaginable. Stay alert for cosmic signs, so much of the scriptures during Advent advises. You can never know when destruction, death, and betrayal are coming. There will be signs, Luke says, in the sun, the moon, and the stars, and on the earth, distress among nations confused by the roaring of the sea and the waves. People will faint from fear and foreboding of what is coming upon the world, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. This is all written in Luke. For the people of the 9th Ward, well, the wait was over. The word Advent means coming or arrival, and it is the season of the Christian church year leading up to Christmas, lasting from the Sunday nearest to November 30th until Christmas Eve. Originally, Advent was seen as a time of preparation for the feast celebrating Jesus' birth, but during the Middle Ages, this meaning was extended to include preparation for Jesus' second coming as well. For the people uprooted completely without a home, a church, a temple, mosque, school, or playground, Katrina struck like it did for the ancient Israelites wandering in the desert without comfort or a promise of safety. Days after Lake Pontchartrain burst through the flood walls, foundation walls the state had for years turned a blind eye to fixing, rescue workers were still pulling parched and terrified survivors off their rooftops by dinghy or even helicopter. Do you remember this? It's wild. People with nowhere to go were sent to various temporary shelters, such as the trailer park in Baker, Louisiana, where I had arrived as a chaplain to help out where I could. I soon found that the best place to connect and listen to people was in the laundry room, where they came to wash whatever salvaged stuff they still had. I perched atop a large container of soap for many afternoons, and that's where I heard over and over about the end days. That wasn't a phrase I had really grown up with hearing. It wasn't part of my theology, and I hadn't heard it before much in live time. Like people really meaning, no, this is it. This is it. What else could explain it, they said. Their entire world was washed away, and in a strange way, it was comforting to them to think that there was some sort of divine plan. The broken world they lived in was slowly being turned on its head. Those suffering would be given freedom soon. God wanted goodness for people, and this was a process. They were simply the victims caught up at the start of it. All will be made well, the most faithful said, through their tears. They could not see a way forward, and yet, they said, but God is not finished yet. In that laundry room, I was invited more times than I could count to Bible studies and prayer meetings and church services about our last days on earth. From the vantage point of the survivors, the flooding, chaos, and cosmic destruction was well underway. Loved ones had already been caught in a trap, swept up, snatched up by a thief in the night, a common reoccurring theme of these Advent texts. All apocalyptic images, many of them knew so well. Who was I to say that their view of the world was too localized, or their interpretation of the Bible too dire or condemning? Who was I to say that, well, God is good all the time, well, it doesn't always work? But this was their reality that now they personally knew and they desperately held on to. Many people throughout history have seen themselves as living in the last days. In each era, people have faced their own version of strife and oppression, whether it be cancer or famine, war, and greed perpetuated by the empire in all its forms, military, political, economic, or the threat of nuclear destruction or climate change. In our world today, nightclubs, schools, and places of worship are torn up with bullets. We have an opioid crisis as tragic as the Titanic. The plague of COVID-19 has ravaged the human race. Our political climate is filled with hate and incivility. An apocalypse seems nearest when the cracks in the social order start to tear, when not only those most oppressed, but those who hold the power feel threatened. Jesus and Paul and many, if not most, early Christians spoke of the end coming in their own lifetime, or at least in their own generation. But so did our religious ancestors later on, including those confused by the notion of the rapture, which was invented in the 19th century and legitimized in the 20th century by Tim LaHaye's multi-million-dollar Left Behind series. Do you remember that? So it was just people who were not brought up into the New World Order, left behind in a field, stranded and completely alone. The apocalyptic writings are definitely pretty funky, but the rapture, as it has come to be understood, it's not actually in the scriptures. However, for many evangelical Christians in the present, the rapture is taught as terrible certainty, meant to frighten people into faithful lives and watchfulness, lest they be asleep at the switch and be punished rather than saved when the dreadful end draws near. Personally speaking, since I didn't grow up with any evangelical friends even, really, and I run like the Dickens from scary movies, this telling of the apocalypse always sounded like science fiction to me. I think what we're looking at in those ancient writings is a snapshot of people's fears and imaginings, someone's picture of another reality, a new realm, the heavenly and the horrible. I mean, if people 2,000 years from now were to only discover a few written texts left behind from our time, what if those texts were our sci-fi, one of our creative imaginings about other realms? Well, those 2,000 years hence, people would really think we were some odd ducks, too. The apocalyptic texts of the early Christians were often code for speaking about the world the people at that time lived in. They were a way for people in politically dangerous situations to speak the truth about power. In other words, they were way more commentary than predictive, way more grounded in the present than on any insight about the future. But just to create a little more wiggle room to explore the wild longings of Advent, let's hold up a contrasting apocalyptic image. Vincent van Gogh's stunning painting of the Starry Night, which he created in 1889, is a favorite of some Bible commentators. The son of a Dutch pastor and for a time an evangelist to the poor himself, Van Gogh was likely familiar with texts like all of those from Luke that say folks will be snatched up and Only some will be saved. The painting depicts an apocalyptic sky like that described by Jesus, with swirling clouds. You've seen it, right? The stars and the swirls. Bold yellow stars shine in a deep dark blue and black sky. In the background is a small town with the church steeple as its most prominent feature. In the foreground, a foreboding flame-like image connects earth and sky. Another new realm imagined. If we are waiting for the light to shine, I'm waiting for that. Historically, for many Christians through the centuries, Advent was considered a somber time of penitence and fasting. And among the many liturgical readings associated with this season is the one that warns Christians to be ready at all times because the Lord may come like a thief in the night. This is such a curious phrase, isn't it? What could it mean? One is afraid of a thief, and their arrival would certainly be unexpected and unwanted. The ancient prophets, Isaiah and Amos and others, spoke of the Israelites wandering lost and forlorn, exiled and aching for a place to call home, hoping that God would hear the cry of those in pain and come near. The early Christians were waiting for the return of the Messiah, the second coming, which would be the day of judgment, and thus they were expressing that one must live a good life before that day suddenly arrived. When they lived in trepidation and anticipation both. They longed for a time when all would be made whole and right, and they felt themselves to be a living part of that world building, but ultimately that God was in charge. For Jews living at the turn of the first century of our common era, the times were difficult indeed. They had fallen to the Roman Empire and were living as an occupied people. Their temple, once a place dedicated to their one true God, now served two masters, God of the Israelites and the Holy Roman Empire. Their temple priests could secure their comfortable positions only by conceding their ultimate authority to Roman officials. The backs of the Jewish people were being broken financially by Rome's imposed taxes, and their spirits were being broken by random and vicious acts of violence carried out as part of Rome's state-sponsored campaign of terrorism. Our modern UU faith, which descends from these religious roots, at its best sends us in search of truth more so than facts, although they are very, very linked, but not always the exact same. We are certainly not literalists about almost any part of the Bible. Yet the stories that resonate through the ages are alive for us because there is an element of truth that inspires us to see things from a new angle, appreciate something more, or change how we are acting. Perhaps the thieves who come in the night are simply the living reminders in all forms of how the world is not yet as it should be. In the ancient story, the judging God asks whether we deserve salvation. And in our modern reading of the lesson, we ask ourselves about how we are acting in the here and the now. Have we been doing our fair share of creating a world made right? We don't want to have to think about this. Some of us have plenty, or even too much, while others among us starve. Are we aware of our part in the rectification of the world order? Are we each doing our part to adjust the status quo? Advent is a season of darkness and reflection, and perhaps a droplet of fear for a purpose. That piece of Advent scripture gnaws at us. Maybe we should be afraid. The world is not yet right. Though it may not always feel this way, the season of darkness is one we pass through together. For so many, December is an intense swirl of sorrows and stress. The season has a way of opening our most vulnerable places of memory as we also navigate the expectations of cheerfulness that this season holds. Whether we experience the holiday season as one of excitement and mystery, or one in which we cannot help but miss the way things were, or a person long past, we will be trundling through this season of darkness together. Longing is funky and desperate at times. It's the stuff of dreams. Being snatched up is nothing bizarre in the dream world. but neither is dreaming of holding a loved one who died years ago, running with a childhood dog through a forest of trees that are no more. In our own imaginings for our own lives and the world around us, our dreams count because they sustain us. Imagining in trepidation and hope the glimmer of what we ache for is the beginning of making room for what might be. This Advent season, as we wait for the light to return and hope for love, the guest, to arrive, we remember the story of a precious baby born to a scared young woman in a cold stable. We tell the Christmas story because there is some truth in it that ignites us year after year. It awakens us from the long, cold sleep of winter and dis-ease. Even as we rejoice, as is right and good, we ache for a time when suffering will end and everyone will have enough, when nations and families will live in peace and the earth will be restored and healed of the damage that has been done. Today, as we light our Advent candles, we are honoring the dark softness of things and the quiet of the night. And we are taking part in the sacrament of remembering and hoping. When we tell our stories, true ones, and parables from our religious tradition, we come to know better who we are and what we are trying to do with our lives. We tell our children the stories that matter to us most, and we press upon them the responsibility to grapple for themselves with the very questions our stories ask of us. We dream of a new realm and awaken again, ready to lend ourselves to that vision. May it be so. Our closing hymn is People Look East, and it's number 226 in our gray hymnals. To go in the dark with a light is to know the light. To know the dark, go dark. Go without sight and find that dark too blooms and sings and is traveled by dark feet and dark wings. Let us find that dark where life blooms and sings. Go in peace, gentle people. Amen.